Cool. Well, thank you so much for showing up, everybody.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Like Eric had said, this is a little webinar session that we wanted to do with you lovely RoastID people. We are very happy that that just went so well and that we got really positive feedback. And so we
Yeah.
decided we wanted to talk with you guys more, and we wanted to just offer you more education since it seemed like you were very interested in it. So we want to just offer you as much as we can from the things that we know. And all of you may come from different backgrounds with, varying levels of equipment, software, interested in different types of coffee. But hopefully today we can at least leave you with one or two things that you didn't know before.
Yep.
And please, like Eric had said, just once again, let us know if you have any questions. Just throw it in the chat, and we can be happy to elaborate.
Yeah, for sure. And so the topics that we're going to actually chat about today are things that Taylor and I have learned from just our experience in the industry, but things that we've talked about in the past as well, whether it be tours that we've done together or events we've spoken at or things we're just passionate about. That's kind of what we're going to be hitting on. And those topics we actually sent to you all to kind of give feedback on what you wanted to hear about. And we took the top 4 and put them here. And so what we're going to be talking about today in order when we're going to be chatting about them is first and foremost green coffee aging, the science behind quality over time. That will dive into kind of what are the variables responsible for actually coffee losing its quality over time, and what's actually happening. Then we'll switch over to roast analysis tools, where Taylor will talk about how to actually kind of get your machine hooked up to the Cropster software and the tools that are within that to help you actually become a better roaster. And so there's going to be a good chunk of things there, and we'll talk about that. And then we'll move on to cupping and QC and chat about tools and best practices for consistent and efficient quality analysis. Another kind of big topic that I know Taylor's really passionate about, especially that idea of consistent and efficient quality, and how do you kind of set up systems or utilize Cropster to make your roastery workflow more efficient. And then we'll finish off with a kind of broad view of kind of sourcing coffee and why you need to be more purposeful if you aren't already with the coffee you source. And each one of those coffees that you source or bring in should have a purpose, and you should define them. And that one will be a quick topic that we will chat about at the end. And so to kind of get things going, I will start this off by chatting about green coffee aging. It's a topic I'm very passionate about because I think it's fascinating. And so feel free to ask questions as we go through this. And so one of the things that people often forget, and if anybody tuned into the third RoastID webinar with Joe Morocco, he actually chatted about this topic, is that green coffee or the coffee seed itself is alive. A lot of people think it's dead, it's inert, it no longer can produce a plant. It can, it's still living. And when you have this seed who is still living and wants to produce a tree or produce a plant, it has to stay alive in hopes that it will become a plant someday. And to do that, it still has these metabolic or biological processes that are going on that consume nutrients. And the bad thing for roasters is those nutrients are the things that you all want. They're the good things. They're the sugars, they're the fats or lipids, they're the free amino acids. And these are largely the reason why this use of these nutrients are largely the reason why you see a degradation of quality over time. And so we're going to dive into the actual science behind that and what's going on to kind of help you better plan how you can buy coffee, but just like how you can expect coffee to age over time. And so when thinking about green coffee aging, I like to break it into two kind of separate problems or two separate challenges. One is largely controllable, one is largely uncontrollable. And so problem number one is the one that is largely controllable. And this is the development of off notes, which occurs from undesired oxidations of lipids in the green coffee seed. And so these lipids or these fats that oxidize can take on aromas from the surroundings. And so that could be maybe you have some really strong scents around in your roastery and you don't have your coffee in Grain Pro. They can kind of take flavors in the cup. But this problem of kind of these undesired oxidations of lipids is largely controlled thanks to grain pro bags, or actually just keeping that coffee in a sealed plastic bag rather than just in burlap. And so a lot of the specialty coffee industry, you might not even have any of your coffees that are without a grain pro bag. And so if you have them, you largely are controlling this. You will still kind of develop those maybe baggy flavors over time, but it's not as bad as it would be if you did not have that grain pro bag. And so that problem largely controllable, and there's not a whole lot that is really disastrous for coffee quality. The second problem that we'll talk about here is the idea of flattening of the cup, and this is the one that I don't want to say should worry roasters, but it's the one that people should be aware of when buying coffee and kind of deciding how it's going to age over time. And this second problem is the reason why the coffee kind of becomes flat over time. And what is occurring here relates back to that first topic that I talked about, which was that the green seed is alive. It is consuming its nutrients. And so if the green coffee seed is using its carbohydrates up to stay alive, well, that means that you have less carbohydrates to use in the coffee roasting process. And so caramelization is not the same as it would when there were more carbohydrates. And additionally, another nutrient that the seed is using are free amino acids. And free amino acids are used up during the roasting process in the Maillard and Strecker reactions to create aromas, or volatile or aromatic compounds. And as many of you may know, aromas are largely contributed, or aromas are what we taste. Those are those unique notes, those floral notes, those really peachy notes, or whatever kind of makes a coffee interesting. And so if you're losing your sugars, you're losing your sweetness, or you're losing your free amino acids, which leads to your aromas, you're losing a lot of what makes that coffee special. And that's no fun. To really dive into this topic further, so you can kind of see how this changes over time, there was a really wonderful study that we're going to show here that was done by Selmar et al. In 2008, looking at the degradation of nutrients in a green coffee seed over 2 years. And so we have 3 separate graphs here. The 2 on the left are sugars or carbohydrates, and the one on the right is glutamine, or one of the free amino acids that is found in green coffee. And so what I would like us to focus on first is the graph on the top left. Actually, I might have to be opposite. The graph on the top left, that one is the glucose content in milligrams per 100 grams dry weight. So how much glucose is in that green seed? There's 3 separate lines here, and each one of those lines corresponds to a specific processing method. The top line is dry or naturally processed coffee. The middle line is a semi-washed or honey processed coffee. And the bottom line, or the lowest one, is a wet or washed processed coffee. And in that bottom line, there's also a washed processed coffee that is still in parchment. So one is whole or bare, and then one is in parchment still. And first and foremost, you'll notice those lines have different starting points, which means they have different glucose levels at the time they went into storage. As you would assume, a natural processed coffee or a dry processed coffee will have more sugars to start, whereas a wash process is going to have less. And so that difference already kind of puts us on a different foothold for all these processes, for all these coffees that were processed differently. And the one I want to focus on is the naturally processed or dry processed coffee, the top bar. If you look at that, it starts out at around 225 milligrams per 100 grams dry weight. And then just over the course of 6 months, it drops to about 200 or a little under 200. And so you're seeing a reduction already in just 6 months of about 10% of the glucose content that is in that green coffee. And if you go to 1 year, you get down to about 175 milligrams per 100 grams dry weight, or right around there. And so you're at about a 20% reduction. And if you expand that out all the way to 2 years, you have only about half of the sugar, or the glucose you originally had. And so the seed is consuming these sugars over time. In all the different processing methods. It is most drastic in the naturally processed coffee because you have the most sugar available. Within the wash process, you still see a reduction that is largely equivalent in terms of that ratio or that percentage reduction. It's just not as much because you had less glucose to begin with. And the same goes with fructose in the bottom graph, but that drop is not as drastic as glucose. And then moving over to the graph on the right, what we're looking at here is glutamine. So once again, glutamine is a free amino acid, and free amino acids lead to aroma or aromatics in that roasted coffee. And so if you lose your free amino acids, you lose your aromas, and that's no good. And this one follows a bit of a different trend than the two graphs on the left. What's going on here within glutamine is no matter what the processing method was, whether it was natural, honey, or washed, over the course of about 6 months, you're seeing that glutamine content drop from about 200 to 240 milligrams per kilo dry weight down to about 150 or so. And so you're seeing nearly a reduction of nearly 30% of this precursor to aromas in just 6 months. And then you get to 1 year and it's about half. And so this idea of the coffee going flat, this is a large component of why that's occurring. You just don't have as much of those precursors to aroma in that green coffee as you did when that coffee was fresh. And so I don't want you all to walk away here thinking that you can never ever buy coffee that's a year off of harvest or 2 years old. That's not the point here. The idea is just to know that there is always a reduction of these sugars and free amino acids that is happening. And so if you try or taste that coffee or sample that coffee at 1 year and it's good, great. It is probably more stable in terms of what you'll taste over the next 6 months than if you got that coffee when it was a fresh crop or right off of harvest, because you won't see that drastic drop in glutamine or other free amino acids, which follow different trends, but are largely in the same realm where they are being consumed. And so these ideas that the green coffee seed is still alive are just things I like to have roasters remember as they kind of plan out their production over time and just how they track quality. So just, yeah, remember, like, the green seed is still alive, and that causes differences in quality. So, yeah. And if you have any questions about that, feel free to shoot them in and we'll jump back to them later on.
I always love hearing that. I've heard Eric give that a few times, and it's always interesting. I love it. So very useful. Cool. Awesome. So the next topic we're going to go into is roast analysis, the software and tools to help you become a better roaster and how to connect your roast machine. So just a quick overview on coffee roasting today I wanted to get into, and then we'll jump into what Cropster has to offer. So how we came into third wave coffee is what we identified was that there was a problem. And the problem was that we needed more data. And the reason we needed more data is because we needed to look at the fine-tuned processes that would happen during a roast, also during brewing, also during other parts, but specifically in roasting, if we're focusing on that. The problem was that coffee can change so greatly from just few degree temperature change, bringing a coffee a little bit farther into development time. Just very minute changes can have a drastic difference on the outcome inside of a cup. Something that you hear constantly throughout the RoastID series. If you went through,
Yep.
I mean, really the RoastID series was a whole, the whole thing was about that fact that just minor changes can have a drastic difference of what you're finding in the cup. And so third wave coffee really solved that problem of data. And so now from what was in the wake of that was roasting profiling systems. So things like Cropster, there are other open source softwares that you can use. And so that's been really, really great because roasters now know that there are really minute changes that can lead to huge drastic differences in their coffee, and they're able to really focus on making fine coffee, which is awesome.
Yeah.
But today what we're facing is another new problem. And the problem is that data is fantastic because now we know what things we should be looking at. But now the problem in roasting that we're coming into, which is a good problem to have, is analysis, because data is really nothing at the end of the day without analysis. And if you're not able to look at things that you're recording properly and in the right context, then the data is difficult to consume and it's uninspiring sometimes, I guess to say it. And so basically what Cropster is set out to do is to make data a little bit more inspiring. And so our goal is to put data in relationship with other data sets so that you can more easily make sense of things like roasting curves, for example, or your cupping notes or whatever it may be. So today, really roast profiling looks like paper notes and spreadsheets, which is often you can't focus on second by second changes. And so really the big focus in third wave was to get on a profiler, look at second by second changes if you can. And that's what happened. And so that's great that we have softwares like that, but we still are, something else I'm going to be hitting on today is efficiency and consistency. And so when you have a software that gives you that data, it is unfortunately giving you a one-to-one solution to your problem ratio. So what's your problem? Well, we need data. What's the solution? Let's give it to you. But we need a software that allows us to be able to analyze that. And so Cropster's main goal is that. And so I'm just excited to show you today all of the different tools that we have. Even if you're using Cropster right now, if you're not using Cropster, there may be some things that you've never seen before. So we're gonna get into that. One of the other things I wanted to mention too, as a cool little sneak preview, Cropster just announced a couple days ago on Instagram that we are doing the first ever AI project in coffee roasting. I think this is the first time this has ever happened in specialty coffee. It's really, really exciting. There have been softwares before that have done roast curve prediction, but we wanted to take that to a new level, and we wanted to wait to do a roast curve prediction type feature until we felt like we could confidently do it. And so what we've done is we've taken thousands and thousands and thousands of roast curves from people who have voluntarily given us their data to be able to use for this project. And we've developed a system that now can look 2 minutes into the future. At any given point after 1 minute into the roast, or after 60 seconds, you're able to look 2 minutes into the future as to where your rate of rise and your bean curve are likely to be based on thousands and thousands of data points that are specific to machine type. So very, very incredible. And that's something that will be released most likely next week, which is really cool. So I'm really excited about that. Cool. So we're just going to run through some of the things that Cropster does have to offer in the roasting tool arena. So this is what our software looks like, roasting intelligence here. In the background, you can see that ghost roast curve, and then the one in the foreground, that blue roast is the current one. Wanted to have those separate so that you can see them a little bit more clearly there. But and once you, so this is something that you may be all familiar with, the process of recording a roast second by second. You may have seen this on a number of different people's computers while they're roasting before, but it's what happens after this that's really fun. So one of the best tools that we have is called the Roast Compare Report. And the Roast Compare Report essentially allows you to do what we did in RoastID, which is take two roast curves and look at the really minute differences between those two roasts. And not only can you look at the differences between the roast curves, but you're able to look at the differences between the gas changes that you made, and also the modulation chart down there at the bottom. And so if we scroll down on this page, what's really great, and I'll just go to the next slide here. So if you were to imagine that we scroll down on that page, we also have at the bottom of the page our cupping notes as well. So the benefit of being able to, as a roaster, have your roasting curves and then your cupping notes right next to each other is it's just inspiring, because it allows you to get into a report and then to look at everything all at once. It's not a time-consuming process. It's not taking this piece of paper and this piece of paper and having to do this sort of thing. And hopefully it allows you to more efficiently get to where you want to be as a coffee roaster. That may be one that some of you have seen before. This may be one you have not seen, which is called Roast Explorer. This is a tool that we've had for a long time, but basically the goal with this tool is you can customize what different data points that you're looking at on the y-axis is there on those columns. But it's to try and look at relationships that are formed between different data sets. And so let's say if we're looking at development time ratio, for example, here, so all these lines represent roasts. And each one of those lines is going to have different. If let's say we wanted to see what happens to our quality, so if we look at quality on the right side, what happens to quality
So I think if anybody's still listening, Taylor may have ran into an issue here because I can't hear Taylor. So okay. So yeah, awesome. Taylor, you are muted right now, according to Zoom. And I think you ran into some issues as you came across.
There we go. Hey, sorry.
Boom, boom. Yeah. So we were just trying to check to make sure if everybody was watching. So we're really grateful that everybody kind of chimed in there. We appreciate y'all.
I appreciate it. Look at that. Unfortunately, I hear him. It was all your computers at the same time. It wasn't mine. Don't worry. So anyways, what I was saying was if we take development time ratio and we narrow that band where let's look at 16% development time ratio in this case. What happens is that if you can see what happens to quality is that if we go to that, now all of a sudden for this particular profile, because all these roasts are of one particular profile. And so if we're able to see now, it's not much, but all of our quality scores, and this is a production cupping format here. So every 3 categories, every category scoring out of 3. So now all of the copies that fall within that development time ratio are scoring over a 7 for us, which is going to be outperforming all the copies that drop below maybe a 14% development time. It's just a small note, but this is something that would be so difficult to find because there's so many roasts that you're doing, maybe you're experimenting with different things. And so basically you're able to see much more faster what may lead to your success with a particular coffee. So that's a really cool tool. And I think it's just fun to play around with. So jumping to one of our other tools. So let's say that you thought that 16% was the best development time ratio for that particular coffee. Now you can set a goal based on that particular parameter. So one of the other tools that we have is called goals. And so what you can do is you can take your reference roast, which is your roast that you determine to be the best roast, and then you can set allowed ranges, either lower or above it, so that if your coffees ever jump outside of those ranges, then you'll get notifications in your CropSter account. So let's look at a specific example. So here we have one checked for development time ratio, like we mentioned. So let's say that our particular coffee, we want it to be a 16% development time ratio. So now we have a lower range that's allowed of 0.9 deviation of lower and 0.9 deviation of upper. And so if we were to hit, let's say 16.9, we're good, or 15.1, we're good. But if we ever jump outside of that, then now we'll get a notification saying, hey, that coffee has gone outside of where we want it to be as a coffee. And now we can look at that and see what happened there and how do we remedy that problem, what's leading to that problem, how we fix it. And this can be particularly helpful for companies who have, roasters who are just getting into roasting and trying to learn things too. But you can set parameters like this for all sorts of different data sets, which is great. And then, so one of the questions that we get a lot is, can my coffee roaster hook up to CropSter? And so I'll have people come to me and say, hey, my coffee roaster is from 1950. It's a Probat. There's no way that thing's going to work. Basically, the answer is yes. No matter if you're interested in any of those tools, we can hook up your roast machine to CropSter regardless. All it needs is a thermocouple on it. And all that means is that it just needs a hole in the faceplate and you stick a thermocouple in it and we can have access to the temperature data. So a lot of your machines right now already have thermocouples on them. And if they do, what we can do is just send you some splicing wire. It's really easy. It's just like hooking up speaker wire, for example. We'd send you some splicing wire. You would connect that where your thermocouple is already fed into your machine. And then we route that to our little data bridge. It's about yay big. And that data bridge plugs into your computer via USB. Really simple, actually quite cheap as well. And anybody can do it. I've helped literally hundreds of people do this, and I've never had a problem. with explaining that to anybody. So very, very in your reach if you are interested in doing so. But yeah, cool. So alongside roasting, the other problem that we've run into as well is cupping data, because cupping, again, we found out that the data is important, but how we record that data is right now, it's somewhat archaic in that a lot of roasters, and you don't need to feel bad for it, are writing things down on paper, which is okay. But the problem is that your ability to use that cupping score any farther than maybe that day or at best that week is very slim to none. And so we want to encourage roasters to be able to use their cupping data far into the future, months and months. Even if you're going to buy the same coffee that you got from last year from the same farm, you can go and compare what you had before versus what you have now, and give great feedback to people like Eric, who will give feedback to people at the farm. And so we want to create cupping tools that are easy to use and allow you to engage in the activities you want to engage in. We don't want you to feel, a question that I'll ask a lot of roasters is, hey, what's one thing in your roastery right now that you feel like you could be doing better? And a lot of times people will say, I wish I was cupping more. I should be cupping more often. I want to be cupping more. And the reason I feel like I get that answer is because cupping is a task, and it's one that provides a short benefit in that period of time. But if you were to know that your cupping not only affected you now, but affected you into the future, weeks and months, and even years into the future, then you might be more encouraged to participate in that activity. And so we have a tool called Cropster Cup. And here's a really sweet photo of it right here. But basically, it's just a way that you can download an app on your phone, and any of the roasts that you do in Cropster will then integrate right to that phone. So you can pull up on that phone the roast that you did, click on it, and then just add in whatever notes they were. It can just be a quick production cupping form or full-blown SEA, or we can even customize your form for you. But just really allowing you to engage in what you want to do with a much lower time cost, really. And so what that would look like, let's say you entered in your coffees one day and you would ask me, Taylor, well, what happens with it? So it doesn't just stay there in the phone, which is great. It's going to upload to your Cropster account. And so now you can go and review what happened in that session. And so what we're looking at is a cupping session where there were a number of different coffees cupped. And so we can go down the list and we can see that there are all these PR numbers. That just stands for production roast. So what's really cool is we can see the result of those cuppings, the comments that were made, the descriptors that were given. But if we want to look at one of those roast curves, we just go and click on that PR number. It's not a piece of paper over here, and then we have to go find it. It's just right in front of you, which is great. And if we want to scroll, if I scroll down on that screen, then we get even more data. So now we can go and look at how the cuppers on your team compared to each other in that cupping session, which can be really, really great, especially when you're trying to dial in how your company understands certain flavors, certain light, medium to dark roast. You can understand your preferences. You can differentiate the preferences of your team versus what might be actually considered good or bad or whatever you want. So yeah, that's great there. And then you can also see if you have, I think, more than 6 or 7 people, you can start to look at spread and deviation of those statistics as well, and it can get real scientific, which is really cool. Cool. And then if we scroll down even farther on that, then what we can look at is the descriptors that were used, and then all the different categories that were given and the scores per category. So if you're looking, maybe you're making a blend, for example, and you're looking
Yep. I was just gonna say that. Yeah, Taylor, your mic is once again kind of acting on the fritz. If you are able to check that or hear me. But yeah. And so, is anyone able to hear Taylor right now? Or at least clearly? Nope. Okay, cool. Well, I can, as I've heard Taylor talk about this several times, especially this part of the category analysis. I'm happy to talk about it until Taylor's mic gets back on board. One of the cool thing. Cool. Yeah, I can hear you, Taylor.
Man, so bad. That's horrible. Sorry. Sorry, Dean and Dom and everybody. That's horrible. Anyway,
if you're able to briefly explain that previous slide, I pretty much cut out during most of it.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
For
Especially
sure.
just like, yeah, especially the bottom part, which I think is really cool. The difference in the colors.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. Hopefully that doesn't happen anymore. Sorry, guys.
Yeah.
But anyways, yeah. If you're scrolling down on that cupping session that you went through, at the very bottom, you're able to see green and red descriptors. Green being deemed positive by the SCA standards from the lexicon of the descriptors list. Red being deemed negative ones, which is great.
Yeah.
Go for it, Eric.
I was to say the other cool thing about it is it's also sorted or lumped by size. And so if you see at the bottom, the first coffee that was cupped, candy was that descriptor, came up twice between the cuppers. And so you get a kind of bigger category there. And so when you're ever like kind of creating your notes for your bags or for your website, one really cool way to kind of quickly sort through that and then find the good notes is just using this tool. So yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, we'll go to that. Cool. Awesome.
See, yep.
Yeah. So then one of the other things that you can use as well, and this can potentially really relate to what Eric was talking about before, when you're seeing a coffee degrade in quality over time, a really nice report to be able to identify that if that's happening to you is what we call profile quality over time or profile development over time, which you can take all any given date range that you want and then look at all the cupping scores for that particular coffee over time. And then if you're seeing a descending trend in your coffee, you're like, well, we're doing the same thing. We have the same profile. What's going on? It may be that flattening of the cup because the precursors to aroma aren't there anymore, or they're just losing over time. So that's another really great report, something that would be also kind of more easily identifiable when you zoom out like this and see the bigger picture. And so anytime you do any of your cuppings, like I said, it's going to tie to that roast curve. So when you pull that roast curve back up, one of the main things that you see in the PR view, which is production roast, you would click on is a cupping score up here as well. So you can see this is the cupping score, and it's going to tell you how that scored in relation to the reference roast, which is also really cool. So if you're scoring above what your reference roast is scoring, then you should change your reference roast. If you're scoring below what your reference roast is scoring, well, maybe you need to make sure that you adhere better to what you did before, or maybe there's something else that you need to look at. But yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. And that's it from that section.
Yeah.
We have better luck.
No, yeah, I love that feature. And I found so many ways to utilize Crapster Cup in kind of those cupping forms. And I think now I have not done this lately, but I was just thinking about how cool it is now that you can kind of create these forums and keep them open and invite kind of users. And so if your cupping team isn't maybe able to come in at the cupping lab at the same time right now, and people can kind of take home coffees, you can kind of just create this open cupping forum where people can at their house on their phone fill in all this data, and then you or your lead roaster, somebody can kind of sort through that, which is really cool, and it makes it really easy and kind of fun. So yeah, big fan. So love Taylor, love hearing you talk about that. Yeah, and so to kind of round all of this out, the fourth thing we're going to kind of chat about is this idea that each coffee you source should have a purpose, and you should define them. And so this kind of has a lot of I'll talk about this. And so as working for a coffee importer, my job is I'm a sales associate, and so I sell green coffee. I work with coffee roasters primarily on kind of like the East Coast, Southeast part of the United States, but and I try to help them find the best coffees for their business. And sometimes this means finding the cheapest coffee. Sometimes this means finding the highest quality coffee. And sometimes it's other things like the story behind the coffee, the flavor notes that are occurring in that coffee, or that coffee comes from a specific region. And so there's all of these different kind of categories, purposes, needs for every single coffee. And every single coffee kind of has a home. And so as a coffee roaster, what I like to kind of, or at least what I walk through, sorry, as a green coffee salesperson, what I kind of try to do when I work with a new roaster is try to identify what is the purpose or what is the underlying reason why they're buying a coffee, or how they're developing their entire offerings list. Or because if I've seen roasters, or there are roasters who will just buy based on kind of what interests them, or what's cheapest. And I think it's really industry, um, and as a coffee roaster, to make sure that the offerings list you are putting out there is curated for a reason. And so Taylor, if you can go on to the next slide. um, yeah, and so as I was kind of saying, kind of first understand, why do you buy? Why do you buy coffees? Is it customer driven? Are you buying coffees because you think your customer is going to like these, or your customer wants these? Or is this curiosity driven? Does this come from your roastery? Is this coffees that you yourself find interesting, or high quality, or what? And kind of think about that when sourcing coffees and being like, okay, is this for me? Okay, that's how I'm going to buy. Or is this for my customer? And then you have to kind of reevaluate your wants and needs in a good cup of coffee and think of, what does my customer want? Because that's going to drastically change which coffee you end up getting. And then moving a little broader, what I like to, or at least what I would like people to kind of think about, is when creating an offerings list, or all the coffees you roast, all the coffees you offer at your cafe or online or to your wholesale partners, think of it almost like you're a chef and you're trying to curate a restaurant menu, and all of the different ingredients that go into those meals or those dinner plates, they each have a purpose. So when a chef is creating that menu, they're thinking about all of the reasons why that ingredient works well. It's the flavor, it's the price point, it's how is it going to be perceived by the customer. And so those kind of things are really important to focus on. And so if you see here, I kind of say, like, how will the ingredient be used? How will your coffee be used? Is it going to be used for a blend? Is it going to be used on the espresso machine for espresso? Is it going to be used for cold brew? And then focusing in on that. And then the next being, is there a price limit, or what is the price limit for that coffee? And then that kind of helping to limit your selection, because if you don't narrow that down, you might end up getting more samples or working through more samples than you need, which is not necessarily the most efficient or best use of your time. The next is being, is this ingredient for show, or does it have a physical purpose? Once again, this kind of gets back to, is this coffee just to kind of show that, like, you can have some really interesting coffees, or is its physical purpose to create a chocolatey note in a cold brew or something of that nature? How will the customer respond to this? This is another one where I see kind of folks get, they buy coffees that are maybe really interesting to them, because they've been in the industry for a while. They've tried so many coffees that the coffees that now stand out are ones that are very foreign to an average customer or average cafe goer. And so just always ask yourself, how is the customer going to respond to this? Not necessarily how do you respond to it? And then lastly, does this fit into the style of the menu? And so where does this actually fall? Does this kind of go with your marketing strategy, to kind of your theme? Or are you just kind of haphazardly picking coffees all over the place and maybe confusing your customer, or not building in a sense of reliability, which isn't always the best, but can work. And then kind of the last part is purposeful planning leads to purposeful buying, which incorporates all of these ideas that I was just talking about. But what I'm trying to do is reframe it here is if you were searching to buy a new home or to buy a new apartment, you aren't just going to visit all of these apartments, go all around town or these houses, and if they're outside your price range, if they're not in the correct school district, or they're near like a noisy road or whatever, you have to create these filters. And so in your roastery, when you're sourcing coffee, create those filters, and it's going to really help the importers you work with and really help narrow down the coffees you bring in, so that once you actually sample them, you're more near the coffee that works best for you. So build in that price range, build in the flavor profile or the types of notes you're looking for, the processing method, maybe what country, what is the desired purpose, and create all of these filters and then give that to the coffee importer you work with or however you source your green coffee, so that the final product you're getting has a purpose, it meets that purpose, and then therefore in the end you're saving yourself time, but you're also just producing a better product and creating more efficiency in that system of green buying. Yeah. And then the very last part also, feel free to really utilize your green buyer. In this instance, I'm chatting about the importer or wherever you get your coffee from, and pick their brain once you have those filters, because you cannot know all of the coffees that an importer has. And I mean, you might want to, but you probably don't have the time to sample every coffee. And you have to value your time, and there's a price tag behind that. And so just really focus in, define that coffee, know why you buy, think like you're curating a restaurant menu, and then create filters once you do that to help aid your importer in getting you the best coffee for your roastery or your cafe or however you are roasting and selling, or if you're not selling, or however you're enjoying that coffee. So, yeah.
Cool. Awesome. There was a question there, but I think that was from something else. We're going into Q&A here anyways. Pat, what I was just going to say is, yeah, it's something that we had talked about before. It's not something that we've implemented, but it's certainly one of the things on our list for sure. And it's a really good question.
Yeah, that is a good question. That would be super cool.
Yeah, it's definitely on our list. But
awesome.
Yeah. One other thing too, feel free to ask any questions in the chat, but one other thing I wanted to show you guys, if you are interested in doing any demos, I'm a representative from here in the United States, but we have people that represent crops for all over the world. So if you're interested in finding out more about this or doing a more in-depth demo with anybody, take note of those names there. And yeah, please get in contact with them. And if you do, mention RoastID as well, and they'll make sure to treat you extra nice.
They'll treat you nice to start out with, but it is extra nice.
Oh no, we're not nice unless they say RoastID. That's for sure.
Oh, okay.
No, honestly, some of the most friendliest people I've ever met are my coworkers. I love them to death. But yeah, please feel free to reach out to them. But yeah, that is those are the names there to check out. But unless there's any other questions in the chat, anything else you want to mention, Eric?
Yeah, if you just want to go to the next slide.
Yeah.
In addition to these names, which if we jump the screen too quickly and you need those, you can always email us. But really, Taylor and I want to extend kind of just our resources and our the knowledge that we have to you all. If there's ever any questions or you think that we can help with anything, please feel free to reach out, and we are happy to help if we can, or connect you with someone who is able to help you. Yeah, like we are really passionate about getting folks to where they want to go, and so we would be honestly really excited to chat. So yeah, feel free to shoot us an email anytime.
Any thoughts on that question there, Eric?
Any sense the Kenyan coffee is going against the grain and scoring better over time? Oh yeah, yeah. So that is an interesting question.
Question is about Kenyan
coffee.
Yeah. Grain and scoring better over time versus what Eric was saying, obviously, in how coffees lose their precursors to aroma.
Yeah, and so that one, as I think about it, I don't honestly have too much experience with that occurring, just because I myself have not cupped enough Kenyans over time to be able to weigh in on that. But just off the top of my head, there's a couple things that do pop up that I think could be contributing to that occurrence. One being potentially the beginning point of all of the nutrients within Kenyan coffees, with specifically acids being so high that it's possible that over time that reduction in acids and the reduction in brightness actually gives way to some of the aromatics and sweetness that is covered up, even if there's a reduction in sweetness. And so like even minor changes in acidity and bitterness, as some folks here may know, kind of like in baking, just like small changes in spices or a small change in like addition of salt and things like that can have a noticeable impact on the quality. So that's possible. Not saying that's what it is. The other might have to do with how the coffee is processed as well. I don't know if many folks maybe are familiar with the double wash process of Kenyan. I don't know if every Kenyan coffee is, but the idea of this double wash process where there actually is two separate washing processes for some Kenyan coffees, and so that might lead to potentially. This is coming from. I'm thinking about this. There's a podcast by Lucia Solis on this on the subject of double washing Kenyan coffees, that it leads to kind of a more homogeneous product. And also there is some kind of leaching of the nutrients potentially in that double wash process. And so maybe the coffee itself is just in a better, as I'm talking about, I don't really know. No, I'm backing up my words. This is a great question, and I'm going to look into this now because as I think about it.
Someone else had thought this. Danilo was saying the same thing that you had originally said as well, about how they're so high in the city in the beginning.
Yeah.
Time it balances weakness, which is exactly what you were saying.
But Dean,
I like that.
Yeah, that's a great question.
Dom's question there. That's a really great question.
Dom, how would you approach the purpose of buying strategy when talking to the decision makers in your business? Yes. So for that, it's understanding what motivates the decision makers in your business most. Is it the impact of your company, your coffee, or is it in most cases kind of the bottom line or the price point of that coffee? Because it's often that I work with kind of green buyers for a roastery who are love a coffee or like coffee nerds, and they find these really beautiful coffees, but once they bring it to the decision makers, they're like, this is just too expensive. And that's often the case. And so I'm going to assume that's kind of maybe where you're getting at. And so for what I always recommend is kind of trying to build some sort of idea of value behind quality, which is a very hard thing for our industry because it's hard to put a price tag on quality. But the idea being kind of long-term quality and building a customer base. Whereas if you consistently try to, I don't want to say undercut price, but buy a lower price point coffees just because you don't value quality, then your overall perception in the customer eye is going to be lower. And so even though customers may not be able to tell minute differences, they are able to pick up on quality over time and know who has the best products because that roastery or that shop consistently tastes good. And so I think there is a lot of value in producing quality over time. And it's very easy for us to get caught up in like, this one's too expensive, we're going to get the cheaper one. And that has an impact on kind of the perception of the customers. So yeah, but it's really understanding what drives your business, the decision makers, and then trying to frame the coffees you want in the most positive light as possible in that way. Yeah. So, oh, Pat, great question. Yeah, I'm not an expert at all, so I'm going to take your word here, Pat. On here, Pat saying that the double washing is a myth, and that many producers probably aren't using that anymore. So yeah. So really, the only answer to that I have, Dean, is kind of the idea of kind of a higher starting point of acids, kind of giving way later on to more clarity and flavors. So thank you for chiming in, Pat. Appreciate that. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry.
Cool, guys.
Cool.
Well, we're again very, very thankful that you came, and we'd love to stay in touch. Please reach out. We would love to just be friends, hang out, following you on Instagram, see what you're up to. Please feel free to get in contact if you have any questions. We really thank you so much for joining. We want to keep on helping however we can. So yeah.
Thank you so much to everybody. And like we said, feel free to reach out if you have any more questions. Happy to help.
All right. We're out of here. See you next time, guys.
Adios. Thank you, Dom.
We love you.
We appreciate it.
Appreciate you guys. Love you guys from Germany.
Bye,
Bye, Simone.